Huge thank you to Abbott for sponsoring this video. Julianne Kopke fell 10,000 feet out of a crashing airplane into the Amazon jungle and survived. At 17 years old on Christmas Eve in 1971, Julianne boarded LANSA Flight 508 from Lima to Pucallpa, Peru, with her mother and 90 other passengers. Only 25 minutes into the flight, the plane began to violently shake as it entered a thunderstorm. Looking out the window in horror, Julianne saw a bolt of lightning strike the wing of the plane. Chaos quickly erupted as the plane began tearing apart. Julianne, who was still buckled to her seat, was ripped from the plane. She fell 10,000 feet through the sky into the dense Amazon jungle below. She remained strapped to a row of seats, which actually acted as a makeshift parachute and landed perfectly amongst the high canopy of the jungle, softening the crash. Concussed and rightfully traumatized by the disaster, Julianne laid motionless on the jungle floor for an entire day. When she came to, she was alone in the rainforest, having only sustained a broken collarbone, a sprained knee, gashes on her right shoulder and left calf. Julianne rose to her feet, found a bag of candy from the rubble, and proceeded to hike for 11 days until she was found by 2 loggers. Today, she is known as Dr. Julianne Diller, a prominent zoologist who has traveled the world advancing the study of animal science and working in the same Peruvian jungle where she survived. So if there's anything you should take away from this story, it's this: wear your seatbelt. Phineas Gage had a 13-pound metal pole blasted through his skull and survived. In 1848, then 24-year-old Phineas Gage was working on a new railroad track in Vermont. His job was simple, literally just blow up rocks. One day, after placing a charge in a hole, he began packing sand with a tamping iron, when suddenly the iron caught something in the sand, probably a rock or a small piece of metal, and created a spark. This tripped the charge and caused a massive explosion, with Gage standing directly on top of that blast. What happened next has been studied by doctors, myself included, for the last 150 years. The blast rocketed the iron bar upward, penetrating behind his left eye, entering his brain, and then exiting through the top of his skull, finally landing a full 80 feet away. When his fellow rail workers rushed over, they were immediately devastated and shocked to see he was still alive despite a nearly 2-inch hole through his entire skull. Not knowing how to help in this dire situation, the workers rushed him to a nearby doctor, who was most definitely unprepared for such a gruesome injury. Despite some initial convulsions, Gage never even lost consciousness, and in one of the most miraculous medical cases ever recorded, he survived for 12 years, but with one major caveat. You see, Gage is also considered a vital piece of medical history, as he led us to start believing the brain was actually responsible for controlling personality. While Gage did survive the explosion, it's documented that damage to his frontal lobe led his personality to go through some major changes. Dr. Harlow, who treated Gage following the accident, said he is fitful, irreverent, indulging at times in the grossest profanity, which was not previously his custom. Some who knew him have claimed it took him years to regain his personality. Reports over exactly how much his personality changed have been the cause of much debate over the years, but regardless, surviving a metal pole flying through your skull is nothing short of a miracle. Aaron Ralston cut off his own arm after being trapped by a boulder for 127 hours and survived, and got a movie made about him. While hiking alone in Utah, Aaron crash-landed into a canyon and had his right arm pinned against a wall by an 800-pound boulder. Strategizing with few good options, he decided to wait and scream for help, slowly drinking his limited water and eating his 2 burritos and chocolate bar. Unfortunately, as the days passed and nobody came, he began to get desperate. Drinking water turned to drinking urine, and eating his burritos turned to eating nothing. With no help on the way, Aaron had to rely on only himself and take matters into his own hand. He took out the dusty, dull blade in his multi-tool and began making his way through his own arm. The pain was excruciating, but the pain quickly turned to panic as he realized his dull blade would never be able to get through the bones in his arm. That's when he realized he missed the primitive tool at his disposal. The boulder itself could be his way out. Through sheer force of will and a rage that only comes after drinking your own pee for several days, Aaron used the leverage of the boulder to twist and break both the radius and ulna bones in his forearm. After withering away in a canyon for 127 hours, Aaron had removed his entire arm, created a makeshift tourniquet, and freed himself from his natural prison, allowing him to stumble out of the canyon where he was discovered by hikers. Aaron survived, and today continues to travel the world, where he not only speaks about his harrowing journey, but also navigates rivers, climbs mountains, and hikes canyons. Dr. Leonid Rogozov performed an emergency appendectomy on himself and survived. In the middle of the 20th century, Russia began aggressively exploring and conducting research in Antarctica, and in 1960 sent an expedition to construct a base known as Novolovorskaya. The team completed its construction in 9 weeks, and then had to wait out the winter until the ice thawed so they could be brought back home. Because the team was effectively stranded at the base, they brought along the doctor to ensure the crew could be treated for any illnesses or injuries if they were to arise. Tragically, Dr. Rogozov was the one who got sick. After suffering several hours of unrelenting abdominal pain, weakness, and nausea, Dr. Rogozov diagnosed himself with appendicitis, or inflammation of the appendix that can cause severe pain and even death if left untreated. Knowing that there were no surgeons around, he reached for all possible conservative methods to address his situation. But unfortunately for the doctor, none of them were effective, leaving him with only one final choice: surgical removal of his appendix, performed by himself on himself? He recruited 2 medical assistants, the team meteorologist and the team driver, to hold open the abdominal incision and hold a mirror to better visualize his surgical field. Seated upright in a hospital bed, taking as many sterilization precautions as possible, Dr. Rogozov began the operation. The pain and fatigue was excruciating, causing him to experience vertigo and take several pauses with his abdomen wide open. Nevertheless, he continued. He removed the perforated appendix and stitched himself back up over the course of just 2 hours. After 4 days, Dr. Rogozov's bowel function returned to normal. After 5 days, his fever was gone. After 8 days, his stitches were removed. And after 2 weeks, he was back to performing heavy work on the base. What a champ! Michael Cassidy was split in half by a fire hydrant during a motorcycle crash and survived. The 25-year-old was riding his motorcycle down the street when he unexpectedly lost control of his back wheel. At that moment, Michael knew he was going to crash. So in a split-second decision to mitigate damage, he veered in between 2 cars in the hopes of finding some grass. Unfortunately, Michael didn't see the fire hydrant hidden between the cars. His body flew full speed through the air directly into the hydrant. When he came to, he was lying face down, but his legs were face up. The hydrant had essentially split his pelvis in 2, known as an open book fracture. This is essentially a death sentence in most scenarios. Fortunately, 2 off-duty nurses witnessed the brutal crash, immediately rushing to his aid and summoning an emergency helicopter to get him to the nearest trauma center. Upon his arrival, doctors placed a special balloon catheter inside his femoral artery and slid it up near his aorta. Once inflated, this blocked blood flow to his lower half, reducing further blood loss and finally allowing doctors to get a good view of the damaged pelvis. It worked. Multiple medical teams collaborated to repair his ruptured bladder, reconnect blood vessels, and reconstruct his entire pelvis with hardware and screws. After a month of physical therapy, Michael now walks with a limp, passes waste through an ostomy bag, and he and his wife just welcomed their first child. Without a balloon catheter to slow the blood loss and a ton of blood transfusions, Michael wouldn't have made it. Receiving a transfusion can mean the difference between life and death when suffering a traumatic injury like the ones in these stories. That's why it's so important to get into the habit of giving. A single blood donation from just one person can help save the lives of 3 people. You can be that one person. As we head into the winter months, we tend to see donations decline because of the weather and holidays, which means donating now and becoming a recurring donor is so important. You can safely donate blood every 2 months. Blood donation could be getting a reboot too. Abbott and Blood Centers of America are introducing a brand new blood donation experience in 2023 with these headsets. Through immersive, mixed reality technology, it could transform the blood donation experience. I actually got to test this experience firsthand. Once you put on the headset, you're taken on a cool adventure into an interactive environment using eye tracking technology. Stay tuned, more to come next year. In the meantime, to learn more about blood donation, go to BeTheOneDonor.com to get all your questions answered and to find a donation center near you. Together, we can help save lives. Check out my video here where I explain what killed every US president. You won't believe what happened to Woodrow Wilson. And thanks again to Abbott for sponsoring this video. Visit BeTheOneDonor.com to find out where you can donate blood and plasma to help save lives today. As always, stay happy and healthy.